Hi, hello, and welcome to Shankar IAS Academy's daily current affairs analysis. And today's date is 24/2026. And an important announcement with this date today, the UPSC application closes. So, when you apply for the exam, it does not count as an attempt until you go sit in the exam hall and sign. So, please do apply for this exam. And with 12 o'clock today on 25th morning, your correction window will be open for a span of 3 days. In case you have any information that you want to correct, please do make use of the correction window. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit on the bell icon if you want to receive instant updates on all the information. And again, an announcement regarding the pre-fit, the prelims fitness test series. There are about 54 tests. The batch started from 20th February 2026. For more information, you can contact 90031 and 90030. These are the reflections. There are about 20 questions that were directly reflected and partial reflections of about 11 questions. 31 questions in total in the prelims, actual UPSC CSE prelims 2025. So with that, we move to the topics of the day. The first topic is about the splendor of the Hoysalas, the Hoysala Temple, the UNESCO World Heritage Sites of 2023. The second is about price gouging. What does price gouging mean and how does it impact the economy? The third one is about the immigration laws, the life, the labor, why is it very, very significant and do we need any changes in the immigration laws? The fourth is about the AIA summit that has ended and what are the key takeaways, what has happened. And the fifth one is the prelims focus for the day. The first topic of the day is unearthing the splendor of Hoysalas. So what do we mean by the splendor of Hoysalas? We all know that the sacred of Hoysalas got the UNESCO tag in 2023. So today we are going to decode that and we are going to see how it is very, very significant and their styles of construction. All these are very, very important in the UPSC perspective. So let's decode today's topic. So this is the Hoysala temple, an image. And now we are coming to the Hoysala dynasty. What are the facts? The static facts. So the first one is their period. The period is from 10th to 14th century CE. And the region they present in South Karnataka, and there are 3 regions in South Karnataka where the Hoysalas were very famous. One is Hassan, the second one is Mandaya, the third one is Mysore. And the capital is in Halebeedu. In Halebeedu, it's Dwarasamutra. The third. The fourth is famous rulers, Vishnuvardhana and Veeraballala. Vishnuvardhana, we all know, he ordered the construction of Chennakesava temple. Veeraballala belongs to Hoysaleshwara temple. So, the Hoysalas are known for religious tolerance. They have had Vaishnavist sculptures and Vaishnavist shrines, and they've also had Shaivite shrines, and they are also people who follow Shaivism and also Jainism. So, we can infer that the religion's tolerance is high in Hoysalas. The architectural features. First one, it has a star-shaped construction platform. It is called as the Jagati. This can be a prelims question wherein what does Jagati mean and what is the shape of a Jagati. So Jagati means star-shaped. And second, it is built using soapstone. So what is it constructed on? If there is a question, it's constructed based on soapstone. Highly ornate, meaning it is highly decorated, and horizontal friezes. So whatever decoration, it's in the horizontal manner and the pattern keeps repeating. There are also latte turned pillars. Now again, when you come to shrines, in shrines they have 3 shrines. That is, if a building has only 1 shrine, it's called Ekakutta. If a building has 2 shrines, it's called Divikutta. And if a building has 3 shrines, it's called as Trikutta. So Ekakutta, Divikutta and Trikutta. Now the extensive sculptural bands. So first the animal based sculptures, that is when they carve elephants. Elephants signify strength because it's a animal which is known for strength. The second one, horses. Horses is known for speed. The third one is Yalis. Yalis are mythical creatures, and Ramayana, Mahabharata panels are also present. So we've seen what are the architectural features, and we have seen the sculptural bands wherein we have seen elephants denote strength. There are Ramayana and Mahabharata based sculptures. Horses denote speed, and Yalis denote mythical creatures. With this, we are going to see about the important temples. The Chennakesava temple is in Belur. Where did we see the Chennakesava temple? The Chennakesava temple was built by Vishnuvardhana, and Hoysaleshwara temple by Veeraballala. So, Vishnuvardhana and Veeraballala. It's in Belur, it's in Halibedu. The Lakshmi Devi temple, this is in Doddagavalli, and the Keshava temple is in Somnathapura. So there are 4 temples. 1, the Chennakesava temple, Hoysaleshwara temple, Lakshmi Devi temple and Keshava temple. So if they give a match the following, the Chennakesava temple Belur, Hoysaleshwara temple Halibedu, Lakshmi Devi temple Doddagavalli and Keshava temple Somnathapura. These were inscribed as UNESCO World Heritage Sites in 2023 under the sacred ensembles of the Hoysalas. Now, stepwell. So we all know that stepwells are known by different names: Pushkarnis, Vavs, stepwells, Kalyanis. Here they call it as Kalyani. Kalyani is in Karnataka. You can remember KK. Kalyani in Karnataka region. It's built below the ground level, and it has descending steps which go downward, and all the steps are symmetrical in fashion. That is very, very important. It is linked to temple ritual ecology, and it has symbolic cosmological elements, that is nakshatra and zodiac associations. That is, zodiac association is basically related to astrology, and nakshatra, we know that it is also related to astrology, and it is linked to temple ritual ecology. Why? Because water is used for abhisheks. The abhishekams that happen there, basically the pouring of water happens. The architectural innovation. What is the architectural innovation here? The first point is it transitions from Dravidian rigidity to sculptural dynamism, and there is also miniatures, but the miniatures are very, very, very detailed in a manner, and the temple is a narrative text. So when you start from the starting point till you reach the ending point to the exit, it has a lot of narrative stories to tell. And the political legitimacy. Monumental architecture is a statecraft, and regional identity was asserted against the Cholas and Chalukyas. So you can remember that they are contemporaries. The Cholas and the Chalukyas are contemporaries. And the religious pluralism is present. They had Shaivites, Vaishnavites and Jain monuments. It reflects a decentralized medieval polity. The temple economy. Temple economy is large land holding institutions. They are cultural hubs. They are craft centers. So, cultural hubs because you see that it embodies culture of faith. Craft centers also create employment opportunities. Also tourism. Water management nodes help during time of disasters. And again, the conservation angle. So the first conservation angle is that the soapstone might wither away and it will create a very lasting impact on the temple. The second is the tourism pressure. So when the tourism is so high, the pressure of the carrying capacity of the region is hindered. And the urban encroachment. So people from various areas might encroach that particular area. The need is scientific conservation and community led heritage management. So this is the need. Now we have come to a point where we are going to discuss all three contemporaries. The first one is the Chola. The second one is the Hoysala. The third one is the Vijayanagara. Now first the core region. Cholas were people who were based out of Tamil Nadu. Hoysalas were people who are based out of Hassan and Mysuru. And Vijayanagaras were people who are based out of Karnataka, Hampi. So this is the region, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Hampi. The second, material used. Cholas used granite. Hoysalas used soapstone. And Vijayanagaras used granite. So the similarity is between Vijayanagara and the Cholas who used granite for construction. Third, temple plan. It's strictly Dravidian. It has a axial type of temple planning. This star-shaped platform, also known as Jagati, and Vijayanagara has Raj rectangular complexes. Scale. Massive scale, vertical emphasis. Medium scale, horizontal spread. Very large temple complexes, Vijayanagaras. And here also it's massive, but it's vertical. There, here it's horizontal. So here there are opposites. Vertical emphasis there, here horizontal spread is there in Hoysalas. The Vimana, it's tall and it's dominant. Here it's shorter and it's ornate. Vimana is modest but huge gopurams are present. Gopuram. It's not very dominant in the early phase of the Cholas. This is minimal, but the Vijayanagara people, they have given emphasis to the Gopura and it's extremely tall and it's extremely elaborate. The sculpture style is bold and it's powerful. It's highly intricate with miniature detailing as we've already seen. Here we have pillared halls with Yali columns in the Vijayanagara Empire. The pillars, simple but heavy pillars. Lathe turned polished pillars and composite pillars, that is you have yalis, horses, everything embedded in it. So this is a difference. Again, the iconography. Cholas were patrons of Shiva, so Shaiva domination, that is the Brihadishwara temple. Here the Hoysalas have Shaiva, Vaishnava and Jain domination. You have seen this is a point where the Hoysalas have religious dominance and the Vijayanagara Empire is opposite to the Shaiva dominance. Next, the temple is a royal power statement. It's a sculptural masterpiece and it has ritual and festival significance. All three are built for different angles. The water structure. Here you have temple tanks. In Hoysalas you have step wells, and Pushkarnis are also step wells, but it is called Pushkarni in the Vijayanagara Empire. The UNESCO sites. The great living Chola temples. The UNESCO site here. The sacred ensembles of Hoysalas, again here. The Hampi group of monuments. So all three of them have UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Okay, with reference to Hoysala temple architecture, consider the following statements. They were primarily built using granite. What were they primarily built using? They were primarily built using soapstone. We saw that only Vijayanagara Empire and Chola Empire had granite. So the first statement is wrong. Stellate star-shaped platforms are a key feature. Yes. The star-shaped platforms are also called as Jagatis. The temples display both Shaiva and Vaishnava themes. True. The first statement is wrong. Third statement is right. So this also can be an option. But we know that the second statement is also right. So the answer should be option A, 2 and 3 only. Let's check the answer. Yes, the answer is option A, 2 and 3 only. With this, we come to the end of the first topic for the day, and let's move to the second topic. So the second topic of the day is something that has a lot of relevance for the prelims and the mains perspective. This is in GS3. This can be asked in GS3 and can be quoted in GS2. Very, very significant article. So let's decode the topic. So, what is price gouging? So, price gouging is basically a phenomenon when there is a crisis situation, when there is a disaster situation, when there is no way out. Increasing the prices of certain goods is what is price gouging. So, let's go through the definition. Price gouging refers to excessive increase in prices of essential goods and services during emergencies, natural disasters, pandemics, wars, creating supply disruptions when consumers have limited alternatives. So there are only limited alternatives. So the first one is, while there is a pandemic, while there is a need for water bottle during floods, increasing the price of water bottle, increasing the price of oxygen cylinders during the pandemic, increasing airline tickets during crisis evacuation. All these three are examples of price gouging. Now, market theory. What is this price gouging based on? The first one is a supply imbalance. What does supply imbalance mean? See, when the demand is high and your supply is very limited, we all know that the price goes high. So, this is where this price gouging demand, let's keep like this, demand for airline ticket is high, but seats here, that's the supply, you have only 100 seats, but let's say there are 1000 people demanding seats. So because the supply here is limited and the demand is high, the price will increase. So they can increase up to, let's say, 20 times the price. Still, people who can afford will be able to get this particular price gouging based benefit. Now, market power in absence of competition. Let's say, now the same example, let's say only Indigo is offering the evacuation process, only Indigo is offering to fly you from a war zone. So, the market power here is Indigo because it has no competition. The third one is information asymmetry. One person will get the information faster and one person does not get the information fast. So, again there is a imbalance there. Now, in Indian context, price regulation can happen through Essential Commodities Act 1955, Lethal Metrology Act, Competition Act 2002, and during emergencies, states control the prices. They try to regulate the prices. So they impose stock limits, cap prices, regulate hoarding, and conduct raids. Now, what is the difference between price gouging and inflation? Both of them have increase in price. So, is every rise in price inflation? During that point, if there is price gouging, is it inflation? Is a question. So, we are going to decode the answer and we are going to see a differentiation tabular column. The first one is the sudden spike in prices of specific goods is price gouging. Sustained rise in general price level is inflation. This happens during emergencies. This can be structural or macroeconomic. This is a micro level phenomenon. This is a macro level phenomenon. This is driven by local scarcity or panic. This is driven by demand and supply mismatch. So the trap that UPSC will ask is every price rise is inflation, but every price rise is not inflation. That we have to remember. So types of inflation that's relevant here. The first one is demand pull inflation. Let's take the case of Deepavali. Too much money chasing too few goods. For example, crackers, flowers, things like this will be on high demand. Cost push inflation, increase in production cost, that is when oil price rises, transport cost will rise. Import inflation, global commodity price will rise, so domestic price will also rise. Supply shock inflation, during war, during pandemic, during climate events, the supply will reduce. So price gouging often happens during supply shock inflation. Okay, because this is where war, pandemic, climate events, all emergencies come. So when you hear the word price gouging, you should always remember emergency situation. Now, monetary policy link, the RBI angle. What is this? The Reserve Bank of India controls inflation using repo rate, the rate at which banks get loan from the RBI. Reverse repo rate is where RBI gets loan from banks. Cash reserve ratio is where percentage of cash maintained as reserve. Open market operation is basically the buying and selling of commodities. So the monetary policy will not fix localized price rise, that is monetary policy cannot change what is happening in Tamil Nadu or Madhya Pradesh or Punjab. So if oil price spikes due to hoarding, people accumulating onions and then increasing the price, raising the repo rate will not increase the onion supply. So it will actually slow down the economy. So in case there is a prelims pointer saying that increasing the repo rate will help in price gouging, no. So this will be handled best handled only with administrative and physical measures and not by the RBI changing the repo rate. What are the governmental tools? First, releasing the buffer stocks that they have, so that will help people. Second, imposing stock limits, percentage up to which stocks can be held. Anti-hoarding rates, illegal stocking, of commodities. Raids against that. That's the third point. The fourth one is export. You cannot export something that is very, very significant in India, say the basmati rice. If people here need basmati rice, you cannot export it for higher price, and import duty also will be cut. Price cap. You can only have a ceiling of say 100 rupees for something, then that's the price cap that's put there. Direct benefit transfer. The direct benefit transfer for from 2021, we know that people who have linked their Aadhaar, their pension, all their benefit transfers get directly credited to their account, that and the subsidies. So if there is an onion crisis, the government will ban the export and it will raid the hoarders. So let market work. The high prices may increase supply, it will attract producers, and efficiently you can allocate who needs what. On the contrary, state must intervene because this will reduce the exploitation, it will reduce the market failure during crisis, and equity will be there over efficiency. So there are two arguments whether the government should intervene. Now, the Competition Commission of India can act against exploitative pricing only when there is an abuse of dominant position. Yes, the Essential Commodities Act allows the government to regulate production and distribution of certain goods during emergencies. Yes, price gouging is explicitly defined as a criminal offence under the Indian Penal Code. No, statement 3 is wrong. So the answer should be B, 1 and 2 only. Let's check. Yes, the answer is B, 1 and 2 only. With this, we move to the third topic for the day. So this topic of the day, the immigration laws, is taken from the Wall Street Journal, and this article is very significant in all three aspects, the GS1, GS2 and GS3. You can use this in most subjects, it's very, very relatable. So let's decode this in the UPSC perspective. So the core issue of the article, the debate revolves around the immigration law. How should it be enforced and how is it enforced? That's the first point. And the humanitarian crisis, that is, there are a lot of assailants and there are a lot of refugees. So how does this happen? The humanitarian concerns that survived here. And the third one is about the labor market needs. So now in certain countries the population is very scarce, or the geriatric population is very high. So the workforce needs to be there, and the labor market forces, the labor market needs a lot of young population. In that case, immigrants are used here, and federal versus state authority, the federal authority has certain laws and how the state authority perceives the law, the difference there, and the deportation versus integration of the immigrants. Now, there is a tension here. The tension revolves between 1, the rule of law, 2, the human rights, and 3, the demand for labor. So here certain human rights laws are there. Do the immigrants have those human rights, or they are shipped directly, is one thing. And what does the rule of law state, and in special instances where the rule of law should be broken, is it actually broken? And the economic demand for labor. So this triangle is central to any immigration debate. So you can draw this in your mains: the rule of law, the human rights, the economic demand for labor. Illegal immigrant. Illegal immigrant is anybody who enters without authorization or overstaying visa. So an illegal immigrant can enter any country. If you have seen the movie Donkey by Rajkumar Hirani, you would have seen that Shah Rukh Khan and his friends, they go to the US in different routes. They take the donkey route. So the donkey route is something that illegal immigrants take to reach a foreign country. So the illegal immigrants are persons who enter without authorization or overstaying visa, and a refugee is defined under the 1951 Refugee Convention. That is, it's well-founded fear of persecution. They know that they might be persecuted, but still they take the donkey route. The Asylum seeker is a person who wants a refugee status in a particular country, but they're not yet recognized, and an undocumented worker is working without legal immigration status. Now, the legal angle. In the US, the federal government controls the immigration, but some states resist this enforcement. And in India, the citizenship is governed by the Citizenship Act of 1955 and the Foreigners Act of 1946, the Passports Act of 1967, and NRC and CAA debates. Now you can relate Article 11 that the Parliament regulates citizenship, and entry 17 in the Union lists where you get citizenship by naturally born, and when in certain cases when one parent is born, you have everything in Lakshmikant, your citizenship chapter 4, that can be related here. And who are aliens, who are the people who are considered as aliens, who are friendly aliens, who are enemy aliens, all these factors can be brushed up with this particular topic. So, labor market dimension. There is a supply for low wage labor because immigrants have nowhere to go, they only want a place to stay. And again, demographic gap. When there is aging population, as already stated, the need for youth population is high. So again, the labor market demands for immigrants in this case, and this immigrants working there will reduce labor shortages. But critics argue that the wages are not paid as much. It strains the public service, and in certain cases it causes social friction. There is also vote mobilization or vote bank politics here. The short-term impact is that wage competition is in low-skill sector. Long-term impact is that it expands economic base, boosts consumption and entrepreneurship increase. Immigration modestly boosts the GDP. So, India faces, we all know that, the Rohingya issue, Bangladeshi immigration, Sri Lankan Tamil refugees and Tibetan refugees. We have refugees from all four sides. Here it's clear that Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Tibet, it's clear. Rohingya issue is from Myanmar, but India is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. India follows a case-by-case humanitarian approach. This is something that you can quote in your GS2/3 mains. So, India is a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. First point, not right. Citizenship in India is governed under the Union list. Yes. Foreigners Act 1946 empowers the government to regulate deportation. Yes. So, statement 1 is wrong. Statement 2 is right. So, the answer should be A, 1 and 3 only. Let's check if it's 1 and statement should be 2 and 3 only. Let's check if it's 2 and 3 only. Yes. The answer is option A, 2 and 3 only. With this, we move to the main topic for the day, which is a very, very interesting topic. The main topic of the day is about the AI Summit, and we are going to see it in a holistical manner. What are the key takeaways for the AI Summit? This is taken from the Hindu. This article is very, very significant in GS 1, 2, 3, all three angles. So, what is the prelims oriented table here? The first point, event, AI Impact Summit, it happened in New Delhi in February 2026. Who are the signatories? 88 countries and international organizations were signatories. The declaration was a New Delhi Declaration on AI. The nature of commitment, it's voluntary and non-binding treaty, non-binding agreement. Major initiative, Global AI Impact Common. India's model, Sarvam AI, multi-billion parameter large language model. The key theme, it is democratization of AI. They wanted AI to be democratized and not based on any binding law, because it's just come into accord and everybody wants to experiment with it. Safe and trusted AI, inclusion and innovation. 4 pillars, DSII, you can remember it like this: democratization, safe and trusted AI, inclusion and innovation. 4 pointers. Investment commitments, $25 billion total commitments and 10 lakh crore by Reliance and similar by Adani. They have already told that they will invest here because this has become like the next oil. You cannot go long with investing in AI. The international linkage, India joined US led partnership for Silicon, institutional ideas, trusted AI Commons, AI for social empowerment platform, AI workforce development, and playbook. So, the core pillars, what does the New Delhi Declaration say? It says the democratic diffusion of AI, safe, secure, and trustworthy AI should be there. The democratic diffusion here itself means that country based exploration of AI. Safe, secure, and trustworthy AI means accountability measures. Inclusion of global south languages means inclusivity. Yeah. The fourth one, AI for economic growth and social good. That's there. Resilient and efficient AI systems. International cooperation platforms. Global plus local world. AI wants to bring in international cooperation platforms, at the same time not forget what the local need is. So they want to create international cooperation platforms where we can take the best practices from other countries and also have our own needs. So the important nuance is that unlike EU's regulatory heavy approach, this is something that's very democratic, and this is innovation friendly but also governance conscious. So very important here, all this will be in GS2 governance angle and GS4 ethics angle as well. Now companies, so few facts. So all of them, Reliance, Adani, Google, OpenAI, Tata Group, Yodata Data Services, all of them have committed to invest for AI. That's basically here. You can just remember this, the exact figures are not needed, just remember this in your mains angle, saying that there are a lot of investors who have come forward to invest. AI infrastructure is the new oil. It controls GPUs, data centers, and large language models training capacity. Now, earlier we had a dependence on US and China's platforms. Now, the dependence will reduce here. And semiconductor mission, digital India mission, critical tech geopolitics, all these can be related with the strategic autonomy, because the semiconductor mission also gives us autonomy. The digital literacy that we are getting in the Digital India mission also gives us autonomy, and the critical technologies that we are trying to build and not depend on other people again gives us autonomy. The Atmanirbhar Bharat, the self-reliance that we are aiming for, will happen if we have our own stake over AI. India is pushing for representation of non-English languages also, because there are a lot of native language speaking people, and we want to aim our inclusivity approach and democratized AI access and open source large language models. This will enhance India's image as technology driving a bridge between West and the developing world. So AI integration can be in agriculture, health, education, manufacturing, and it can multiply productivity, GDP, and exports. This you can tie this to the digital public infrastructure, that is UPI, Aadhaar, and ONDC. Now the concerns. First, you're talking about a lot of data, you're putting in a lot of data into AI, it creates data privacy concerns. Second is the algorithmic bias. When there is a lot of algorithm change, the bias. Today, 3-4 days back, we had an article wherein the black box syndrome was discussed. That is when you put in 2 caste names and ask a person to actually refer and tell which person will have what kind of job, it actually shows the person having a higher caste. So The algorithm has a bias. It is being racist at times. It is being stereotypical at times, because that's how the historical data is fed. So again, this is a concern. The job displacement. When AI replaces humans, it might displace a lot of jobs. The energy consumption of AI and security risks that are present. Now the mains practice question for the day. AI governance must balance innovation, inclusion and security. Discuss in light of recent global developments. This is a 15-mark question for 250 words. Please send us across your answer copy so that it will aid us, help us aid you better in your preparation. So now we have come to the prelims practice, prelims focus for the day, and the first one is the Nigerian mine tragedy. That is, 37 miners were killed and 26 others were hospitalized after the toxic gas leak that happened in the Nigerian region. It occurred at a lead and zinc mine in north central Nigeria. The preliminary findings show us that there was a sudden discharge of the lead oxide and there were a few gases that were associated, that is sulfur and carbon monoxide as well, and the ventilation was not proper, it was very poor, and that's why it worsened the build-up in the underground region. The second one is Mobile Vidhi Pustka Hindi campaign in Karnataka. It is led by the school education department and in collaboration with the Women and Child Welfare Committee, the Library Health and the police departments. The campaign says that you have to put down your mobile and pick up a book. That's the basic slogan here, and the objective is to encourage school children to reduce their screen time and develop a habit of reading books to shape them into responsible citizens. And while you read books, it is believed that you will increase your rational thinking skills and your the third topic is the Belagram, India's first net zero panchayat. So this is something very, very significant. You can use this in your GS 1-2 answers. This is the recognition of Balagram in Bandara district in Maharashtra at Mumbai's Climate Week 2026. The awards are Rashtriya Panchayat Pushkar 2024 for its climate action. So what did it do regarding climate? First one, planted 90,000 trees during weddings and festivals. It transitioned households from smoky chulas to LPG gas stoves. It installed solar panels in homes and in Anganwadis and Panchayat offices, and it promoted waste segregation at doorsteps, the wet and dry waste segregation doorsteps, and eliminated single-use plastics. So these are the key initiatives. So India's first net zero panchayat can be used as examples in mains. So now we have come to the prelims practice question for the day. The Mobile Vidhi Pustka Hindi campaign launched by Government of Karnataka primarily intended to encourage students to participate in digital learning platforms. No. Reduce excessive mobile phone use and promote reading habits for school children. Yes, this was the campaign itself. Provide free mobile phones with educational apps. No. Ban mobile phones in all educational institutions? No. So the answer should be option B. Let's check. Yes, the answer is option B. With this, we have come to the end of the prelims focus for the day. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit on the bell icon. And thank you for watching today's videos.